The most feared man in the city thought he had buried everything soft inside himself. He was wrong, because the one person who could prove it just walked through the wrong airport at the wrong moment, and she was carrying something he never knew existed. If this story hits you somewhere deep, drop a like and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now stay with me, because what happens next will change everything you thought you knew about power, love, and the secrets that survive both. The terminal smelled like jet fuel and recycled air, and the particular kind of desperation that lives in airports. People running toward things, people running away, and the vast indifferent machinery of departure that doesn't care which one you are. Raphael Voss moved through the crowd the way he moved through everything, without apology, without acknowledgement that anyone else in the space had equal claim to it. His security detail fanned around him at precisely the right distance, close enough to be useful, far enough to be invisible. He had trained them that way over 4 years of iteration, of watching men crowd too close or hang too loose, of making corrections that ranged from verbal to permanent, depending on the severity of the failure. His associates from the Kessler Group walked alongside him in the outer ring, speaking in low voices about the shipment logistics that had brought him to this terminal in the first place. Raphael listened without appearing to listen, processed without appearing to process. It was a skill he had developed before he was 20. It had kept him alive past 35, which in his line of work was not nothing. He was nodding at something Marcus Webb was explaining about the Rotterdam documentation when his body stopped. Not slowed. Stopped. Like a machine that had received a catastrophic input. His foot came down wrong and he caught himself on the next step, and Marcus kept talking for 2 full seconds before he realized Raphael had gone completely still in the middle of the moving crowd. "Sir?" Raphael didn't answer. He was looking at a woman 40 feet away, moving in the opposite direction through the terminal's central corridor. She was carrying a bag over her left shoulder and had her head turned slightly to the right, watching the gate numbers on the overhead display. Her hair was shorter than he remembered it. She wore a gray coat he didn't recognize. She looked different in the way that people look different when they have lived hard years quietly. Not damaged exactly, but altered, the way a house looks different when you realize the people inside it changed while you weren't watching. But he knew her. He knew her in the muscle and the bone and the place behind his sternum that he had worked for 3 years to convince himself was just scar tissue. Elena. He said nothing. His mouth opened and nothing came out, because his brain was still processing the impossibility of what his eyes were sending it. Elena Marlowe, standing 40 feet away in an airport terminal, alive and unhurt, and present in the physical world, when every piece of intelligence he had run in the first 6 months after she vanished had come back empty. When every lead had dissolved into nothing. When Victor had finally sat across from him and said the words Raphael had refused to accept, "She doesn't want to be found." And Raphael had thrown a glass at the wall and then sat very still for a long time and then decided to stop looking. That was 3 years ago. She was here now, and she was not alone. In her arms, pressed against her left shoulder, was a child, small, wrapped in a blanket the color of cream. The child's face was turned toward Raphael's direction, not because the child saw him, not yet, but because some small restless movement had shifted the bundle in Elena's arms, and the angle of the baby's face opened toward the corridor, and Raphael's vision narrowed to a single point, the eyes, dark, intense, framed by features that were still rounding out in the soft, formless way of infancy, but that carried, even now, even unformed, something unmistakable. He had looked at those eyes every morning of his life. They stared back at him from every mirror. They had been described as unsettling by men who feared him, and as beautiful by women who wanted things from him, and as inhuman by people who had seen what they looked like right before he made a decision that ended something permanently. He was looking at his own eyes in the face of a child he had never seen. The crowd moved around him. Someone jostled his shoulder, and Marcus said something sharp to that person, and there was a brief exchange of energy in his peripheral field that he registered and ignored completely. The terminal kept happening. Announcements, rolling luggage, a child crying somewhere behind him, the distant mechanical groan of a jet bridge. And none of it touched him. He was inside something that had no sound. Elena looked up. The way it happened was very fast and very slow simultaneously, which Raphael understood was not physically possible, but experienced as true. She turned her face from the gate signs toward the corridor ahead of her, the way people do when they are about to navigate around a cluster of stopped passengers, and her eyes moved across the space with the automatic casualness of someone who expects to see strangers. And then her eyes found his face, and she stopped breathing. He could see it from 40 feet away, the specific stillness that came over a person when the body understood something that the mind was still refusing. Then she moved. Not toward him. Away. She turned her shoulder, tucked the child tighter against her chest, and walked fast in the opposite direction, cutting left through a gap between two families with luggage carts. Her head went down. Her pace changed from the unhurried movement of someone watching gate numbers to the controlled urgency of someone trying not to look like they were running. Raphael's body made the decision before his mind caught up. He pushed left through the crowd, and his details scrambled to adjust around him, and Marcus was saying his name with the particular pitch of a man who understood something had just shifted in the landscape and didn't yet know what. Raphael didn't look back. He moved through the gap Elena had used, and the families with luggage carts opened around him the way people opened around men who moved like he did, and he came into a clear stretch of corridor and saw her. She was 30 feet ahead, still walking fast, not looking back, which meant she was either very disciplined or very frightened, and he had known Elena long enough to know the difference. She was frightened. The way she held the child, that particular curl of the body, the way the shoulder came up, the head angled down, that was the posture of someone shielding something precious from a threat they could feel approaching. Elena. His voice came out flat and without inflection because that was what happened when he was operating in a space beyond the normal register of emotion. Not cold, blank. The blankness that preceded things. She heard it. He saw her hear it. The faint stutter in her stride. The quarter second where her body wanted to stop and her will overrode it and kept her moving. She cut right toward a set of doors marked with flight information and pushed through them, and Raphael was 15 feet behind her. Victor materialized at his right shoulder from somewhere in the reorganized detail. Boss! Just the word, just the weight of it. Stay here, Raphael said. That's not... Stay here. He pushed through the doors. The corridor on the other side was narrower and less crowded, a secondary connector between gates, the kind of space that felt like the skeleton of the terminal rather than its face. Fluorescent light, gray floor, a few travelers moving with the particular focus of people who knew where they were going. Elena was 20 feet ahead, still moving, and now she looked back. That look, 3 years fell away in it. He saw everything she was. The woman who had sat across from him in the blue chair in his study at 3 a.m. and told him things about himself that no one else had dared to say. The woman who had laughed at something he'd done with a specific kind of surprised delight that had made him feel, for the first time in his adult life, genuinely seen rather than feared. He saw all of that in the single second her eyes found his over her shoulder, and he saw what was layered over it. Panic. Real. Animal panic. She ran. Not a flat sprint. She was carrying a child. She couldn't sprint. But she moved as fast as a person could move with a baby pressed against their chest. And she turned the corner at the end of the corridor, and Raphael ran after her, and he felt something that might have been described as irrational, because Raphael Voss did not run after people, and certainly not through airports, and certainly not while his security detail stood confused in a terminal behind him. He turned the corner and nearly collided with an airport employee pushing a cleaning cart, sidestepped, kept moving, and saw Elena stopped. Stopped because she had run out of corridor. A set of secure doors stood ahead, requiring a badge she didn't have. She was backed against the wall beside them, one hand flat on the surface, the child against her chest moving in short, hard breaths. Raphael stopped 6 feet from her. They looked at each other. The sound of the terminal was muffled here. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, and somewhere in the sealed space between them was 3 years of every question he had never been able to answer. Elena spoke first. Her voice was quieter than he expected and steadier than he thought a frightened person could make it, and he recognized that steadiness. She had always been able to find a center in herself, even when everything around her was falling. Raphael, don't, he said. She closed her mouth. Don't say my name like you're trying to control the next 60 seconds. You've had 3 years. You don't get to manage this. Her jaw tightened. She shifted the child slightly. A reflexive, protective adjustment that she seemed to make without thinking. This isn't... She stopped, started again. This isn't the place. You made it the place when you ran from me. I didn't know you'd be here. Obviously. The baby made a small sound. Not crying. Something in between sleeping and waking, the kind of sound that belonged to a creature that hadn't yet learned to perform its distress, only to express it. Elena's hand moved to the child's back and pressed gently, and the sound subsided. Raphael watched her do it. He watched the way her body knew the motion. Automatic, practiced, the gesture of someone who had done this thousands of times in the quiet hours that he knew nothing about. 3 years of quiet hours. 3 years of that particular shape of experience accumulating in her without him knowing it existed. His throat felt tight in a way he had no practice with. How old? He said. She looked at him. How old is the child? Silence. The buzzing light, her hand still pressed against the small back. Elena. 14 months. The math was not complicated. Raphael had done arithmetic under pressure in situations that actually required the skill. He did it now in the 3 seconds following her answer, and the result came back clean and certain, the way results did when the inputs were simple. 14 months. 3 years since she left, minus 14 months of a child's life, minus 9 months before that. The number left behind was not large. It was in fact very small. Is that mine? The words came out without inflection because he had nothing left in him to put behind them. He was not asking rhetorically. He was not asking to frighten her. He was asking because his entire body was waiting for the answer with a kind of suspended urgency that he had never felt before any negotiation, any confrontation, any moment of professional violence that he could recall. Elena's eyes were wet. She had not cried. The tears hadn't fallen. But they were there, backed up against the lower lid, held in place by whatever it was inside her that kept finding the center. She said nothing for a long time. Then she said, yes. Unbound. Raphael left the airport. He walked back through the secondary corridor and through the main terminal and past Victor, who read his face and said nothing, and out through the glass doors and into the loading zone where the car was waiting, and he got in and sat in the back seat and looked at nothing for a long time. Victor got in the passenger seat. Marcus and the other two positioned in the follow car. The driver waited. Drive, Raphael said. They drove. The city came up around them. The specific gray gold of late afternoon, buildings sliding past the tinted windows, traffic, a delivery truck blocking the left lane that the driver navigated around without being told. Raphael watched none of it. He was watching something internal, something that had no geography. Victor, after 11 minutes of silence, Raphael knew because he counted them without meaning to, turned in his seat. You going to tell me what happened back there? No. A pause. Okay. She was there. Elena. Yes. Victor was quiet for a moment. And? She had a child with her. The car moved through an intersection. The light above them cycled through yellow. How old? Victor said. 14 months. Victor did the same math Raphael had done and arrived at the same answer, because Victor was not a slow man. He made a sound in the back of his throat. Not quite a word, not quite a reaction, something acknowledging. Do you know for certain? She told me. She told you. She told me yes. The city continued. A woman on a corner, waiting for a bus, not looking at the car. A dog on a leash ahead of its owner, nose to the pavement. Small, separate lives. Raphael watched them through the glass and felt something he couldn't name pressing against the inside of his chest. He had held dangerous things before. He had held power and leverage, and the particular terrible weight of knowing something about someone that they didn't know he knew. He had never in his life held the weight of knowing he had a child who had existed for 14 months without him. 14 months of breathing and eating and learning the basic mechanics of being alive. 14 months of whoever Elena had become in the quiet, holding the thing they had made together and raising it in whatever shape a life like that took when it was built in hiding. His son. He hadn't said the word yet. It sat in him like a foreign object, something the body hadn't yet decided how to incorporate. "I need everything you can find," he told Victor. "Where she's been, where she's living. Who knows about this? How fast?" "Yesterday." Victor nodded and turned back toward the front. Raphael looked at his own hands in his lap. The knuckles, the scar on his right index finger from something that had happened when he was 23 in a warehouse in the Port District. He had lived in his body for 35 years and used it as a tool and protected it as an asset, and had never in those 35 years looked at it and thought about what it might pass on to someone else, what it might make, what eyes it might transmit, those eyes in the baby's face. He pressed his thumb hard against the scar until he felt the pressure in the bone. He would find her. The search took 11 days. Raphael understood patience in the abstract. He had won things through patience that couldn't be won through force, had waited out partners, rivals, government scrutiny, men who thought time was on their side until they discovered it wasn't. But this patience was a different animal. This was the kind that crawled under the skin and didn't sleep, that sat across from him at his own desk while he tried to focus on the Kessler account and the port documentation and the 3 other things that required his attention, and reminded him constantly of its own presence. Victor ran the search through channels that didn't generate paper. Facial recognition through the airport's recovered footage gave them a name. Not Elena Marlowe, not anymore. She had been living as Claire Vance for at least 2 years. A credit trail, carefully maintained to look ordinary. A lease. A utility account. A pediatrician's office record that confirmed one patient, 14 months old, healthy, under the name Noah Vance. Noah. Raphael looked at that name for a long time when Victor put the file on his desk. She had given the child a name without him. Of course she had. What else would she have done? But the particularity of it, the name chosen, existing in the world, attached to a person who was half his, moved through him with a specific quality of strangeness he had no framework for. He sat with the file for 2 hours. Then he closed it and told Victor to arrange transportation. The coastal town was 4 hours south, small. The kind of place that had a hardware store and a diner and a fishing pier and not much else. The kind of place where a woman with a new name and a 14-month-old child could settle into the texture of the ordinary without attracting attention. The kind of place that Raphael had no previous reason to ever visit, and consequently had no presence in, no infrastructure, no people who owed him things or feared him. He went with Victor and 2 others in an unmarked car. No convoy, no display. He had thought carefully about how to approach this. He had run several versions of it in his mind during the drive, but the controlled version, where he arrived, stated what he knew, asked the questions he needed answered, and listened without escalating. He had run that version sincerely and with real intention to execute it. He had also understood, somewhere underneath the intention, that he was likely not going to be able to execute it. 3 years and a child and those eyes. He was not going to be controlled about this. She was in the back garden of a small rented house on a quiet residential street 2 blocks from the water. He could smell the ocean from the car when they parked. The house had a wooden fence along the back, weathered gray, the kind of fence that had been repainted once and was overdue for a second time. A garden beyond it, not elaborate, just a stretch of grass with some container plants along the edge, the kind of garden a person made when they wanted something living around them, but didn't have time to tend anything ambitious. Victor and the others stayed with the car. Raphael walked to the gate at the side of the house and opened it and went through. Elena was on her knees in the grass, placing something in the soil of one of the containers. A trowel, a small plant in a plastic pot beside her. She had her back to him, and she didn't hear the gate because of the sound the ocean made behind the houses, the low, constant white noise of it, and Raphael stood 4 feet inside the fence and watched her for a moment before she became aware of him. He wasn't sure what he was looking for in that moment of watching, something to make it easier or harder, something to confirm or deny the feeling that had been living in him for 11 days. He found neither. He found only the specific, ordinary weight of her. A woman in the garden of a house she rented under a name that wasn't hers, putting a plant in soil, not knowing he was there. She turned, registered him, and went completely still. The trowel was still in her hand. She didn't drop it. He noticed that, The way she held on to the tool even after seeing him. The way her hand tightened around it rather than releasing it. Not as a weapon, as an anchor. Raphael. Her voice was flat, not frightened the way she'd been in the airport. Something harder than fear. Something that had been living on the other side of fear long enough to calcify. Elena. She stood up slowly, the way a person stands when they have decided not to rush anything. She was wearing jeans and a shirt with dirt on the knee from where she'd been working. Her hair had grown some since the airport. She looked at him like she was taking inventory. How did you find me? The same way I find everything. Of course. She looked past him toward the gate. How many did you bring? 3. Are they coming in? No. She looked at him again. Something in her face reorganized itself slightly. Not relaxing, but adjusting to the specific shape of this particular threat. Noah's inside. Napping. He said nothing. The name in her mouth, applied to the child that belonged to both of them, had a weight to it that pressed on something in his chest. I'm not going to have this conversation while he might wake up and... Then talk fast, Raphael said, her jaw set. That's not how this works. You want to tell me how this works? His voice came out very quiet. The quiet that the people in his professional life had learned over time was more dangerous than volume. You want to explain the structure of this situation to me. 3 years, Elena. 14 months of a child I didn't know existed. You want to tell me how this works. I left for a reason. That's not an explanation. I know it's not. I'm not saying what I did was... She stopped, pressed her lips together, started again with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this conversation in their head many times and was finding that the real version didn't follow the rehearsed track. I didn't plan to leave when I did, and I didn't plan to stay away. Things happened. What things? Raphael? What things happened? The quiet was gone. Not loud, he didn't raise his voice, but the stillness in it broke, and what was underneath it came through, and she heard it, and for the first time since he'd entered the garden, she looked like she was measuring the distance between herself and the back door. I looked for you. For 6 months I looked for you. I had people in 4 cities. He stopped himself, breathed. Tell me what things happened. She looked at him for a long time. The trowel was still in her hand. Then she said, Your mother came to see me. The silence that followed had a different quality than the previous ones. All the silences in this conversation had been loaded, with accusation, with history, with the pressure of things unsaid. This one was different. This one had the specific quality of something that had just become real in a new way. Cassandra, he said. Yes. When? I was 8 weeks pregnant. I found out I was pregnant, and I was trying to figure out how to tell you, and before I could... She came to the apartment. The one off Mercer. She had a key. I don't know how she got a key. Elena's voice had found something even, not calm, but precise. The voice of someone recounting something they had gone over many times in private. She sat down. She told me she knew about us. She told me she had known for a while and had been waiting to see if it resolved itself. She said I was... A brief pause. She said I was a distraction that had gone on too long. What did she tell you to do? She didn't tell me to do anything. She told me what would happen. Elena set the trowel down against the container and straightened. She told me you had things planned. Consolidation of the Western operation, a merger with the Harmon Group. Things that required a certain... She searched for the word. Image. Reputation. That a child with someone like me would complicate things in ways that could be dangerous for the organization. She told you to leave. She told me that if I stayed, the child would eventually become a liability. She told me how she handled liabilities. Elena's eyes were steady. The tears that had been there in the airport were gone. She was very specific, Raphael. She was very clear about the kinds of things that had been done to protect organizational assets in the past. She told me about a woman named Solis. I didn't know that name. I looked it up afterward. There wasn't much to find. Raphael stood very still. He knew the name Solis. He had not thought about it in years. It belonged to a chapter of his mother's operational history that preceded his full involvement in the organization, that existed in the record as a resolved matter, a piece of historical housekeeping. He had never had reason to present it to Elena as context for anything. He had never imagined his mother would use it as a threat. She convinced you I would choose the organization over you. She didn't have to convince me of much, Elena said, and the precision in her voice didn't crack, but he heard something in it, something that had been worn smooth by years of rubbing against itself. I had watched you for a year and a half. I knew what you were capable of choosing. I knew the logic of your world. She looked away for a moment, toward the back of the garden where the fence met the neighbor's property. She made it clear that the choice wouldn't even reach you, that it would be handled before you knew there was a choice to make. He crossed the distance between them in 3 steps, and she didn't move back, which told him something about what 3 years had done to her specific relationship with being frightened of him. He stopped close enough that he could see the fine detail of her, the tiredness around her eyes, the set of her shoulders, the way she held herself with the particular postural tension of a single parent who had learned to be always partially ready for the next thing. She had no right, he said. No, Elena agreed. She didn't. I would have... He stopped. His throat did the thing again, the tightness without category. I would have chosen differently. Maybe. She looked up at him. I didn't know that then. I still don't know it for certain now. I'm here. You're here because you saw me in an airport. That's not a choice, that's a collision. He couldn't argue with that. He didn't try. Where is he? He said instead. Sleeping. I told you. I heard you. He took a breath. I'm not going to wake him. He didn't finish that sentence. There was no clean way to finish it. He just needed to know the child was in the building, in proximity, real in a way that the photograph in Victor's file and the name on the pediatric record were not yet real. Elena watched him. Something moved across her face. Not softening exactly, more like a recognition, something seen that she hadn't expected to see. Come inside, she said. Masked. The house was small and carefully arranged. Not poor, she had enough clearly, though he didn't yet know how she had managed it, but modest in the way that things were when a person was building security rather than comfort. Everything had a place. The kitchen was clean with the thoroughness of someone who needed the surfaces clear to think. On the counter, a coffee mug, a small stack of books, a jar of the pureed food that infants ate that he recognized from no personal experience but from the absolute otherness of it in this kitchen, in this context, as belonging to a different kind of life than his own. She led him through to the living room and pointed at the monitor on the side table, a baby monitor, small screen, and on the screen the static image of a crib in a dim room, and in the crib a child sleeping. Raphael looked at the screen. He looked at it for a long time. The child was on his back, one arm flung out to the side, the characteristic total commitment sleep of someone who had not yet learned to be guarded even in unconsciousness. Dark hair. Even in the gray resolution of the monitor screen, something about the set of the features was legible to him in a way that went beyond reason or assessment. He looked at his son sleeping on a small screen in a house 4 hours south of everything he had built and run and defended for 15 years, and the thing in his chest that had been pressing outward since the airport pressed harder, and he put one hand on the side table and leaned on it for a moment because his balance had done something unexpected. Sit down, Elena said from behind him. Not gentle, just practical. He sat. She sat across from him, in a chair angled toward the couch. The space between them was small in a room this size. She put her hands in her lap and looked at him with the steady regard of a woman who had decided at some point to stop being afraid of him specifically, even if she hadn't stopped being afraid of the situation in general. What are you going to do? She said. I don't know yet. That's not a reassuring answer. I'm aware. She looked at him. I need to know that you're not going to... She paused, chose words with the care of someone picking their way across uncertain ground. I need to know that what you do next isn't going to make things more dangerous for him. He's mine, Raphael said. Nothing I do is going to make things more dangerous for him. That's exactly what worries me, Elena said, because everything around you is dangerous. Every person who knows your name and wants something from you or wants to hurt you is now. She stopped herself, pressed her hands together in her lap. He's 14 months old, Raphael. He doesn't know what the world is yet, and the world you operate in. I know what the world I operate in looks like. Do you? She wasn't being rhetorical. She was asking genuinely, and the genuineness of it, the lack of performance in it, was worse than an accusation would have been, because I lived in it for a year and a half, and I watched what it did to the people around it. I watched what it did to you. He had no clean answer for that. I'm not asking you to disappear, she said. I know that's not something you can do. I'm asking you to tell me honestly what you're planning so that I can make decisions about what comes next. For him. She glanced at the monitor. The child hadn't moved. He's asleep right now, and he doesn't know you're here. He doesn't know you exist. And I have to decide what that knowledge is going to cost him. The word cost sat in the air between them. Raphael looked at the monitor, at the sleeping shape of the child in the gray-lit room. He thought about Cassandra. He thought about the woman named Solis, whose name existed in a record he had never examined closely because he had never needed to, and who had apparently been used as a cautionary example in a conversation he had not been present for. He thought about 3 years of nights in the study at 3 a.m. and the blue chair that was still there, that he had never moved, that he had occasionally caught himself looking at with a specific and useless feeling he had no name for. He thought about those eyes in the airport. I'm going to handle my mother, he said. Elena went still. And after that, he said, I'm going to need to meet my son. She looked at him for a long time. The monitor hummed softly on the table. Outside, the ocean made its low, indifferent sound against the shore. You said handle, she said. Yes. What does that mean? He looked at her. It means she's not going to be in a position to threaten you or him again. She absorbed this. Her face was very careful. And what does that cost you? He was quiet for a moment. More than she knows. The words were not large. He didn't make them large, but something in the room shifted when he said them. Something in the quality of the space between them. The way two people occupy the same air when they are deciding whether to trust each other again after the kind of damage that had been done here. Elena reached up and pressed her hand briefly to her own mouth. Not crying, something before crying. Something that lived in the body before the body decided how to process it. She told me you would choose the organization, she said. Every time. That's what she said. That when it came to anything versus the organization won. She said that was what she had built in you. She built a lot of things in me, Raphael said. Some of them she doesn't get to keep. The monitor shifted. On the small screen, the child moved, rolled slightly, one arm repositioning, the committed sleep interrupted briefly by some internal signal that resolved itself in a new position. The small face turned slightly toward the camera. Those eyes, closed now. Resting in the face of someone who didn't yet know he was in the middle of something. Raphael watched the screen until the child settled again. What's he like? He said. Elena was quiet for a moment. Then, with the specific reluctant care of someone offering something precious to uncertain hands, stubborn. Even at 14 months, when he decides something is going to happen, it happens. A pause. He laughs at things that aren't funny, things that are funny to him at least. I can't always tell what the logic is. Another pause. He has your eyes, obviously, and the way you go still when you're thinking. He does that. He just goes completely still, like the entire operating system is focused on one thing. Raphael said nothing. He was full of something that had no outlet. He's healthy, Elena added. In case, I want you to know that. He's healthy and he's developing normally and She stopped. He's wonderful, she said, with the directness of someone stating a fact rather than performing a sentiment. He's a wonderful person, even at 14 months. You can already tell. But the weight of that landed in Raphael's chest and stayed there. He stood up. Not because the conversation was over. It was not over. It was barely begun. But because he needed to move, needed to reorganize the physical space of himself around what was happening in him. I'll come back, he said, when I've handled things. How long? I don't know. A week, maybe 2. She looked up at him from the chair. And if I decide I don't want you to come back, he looked at her for a moment. That's not something I'm able to offer you. Her jaw tightened. You can't just... He's mine, Raphael said. I understand why you left. I understand what you were told, and I understand that from where you were standing, it made sense. But he exists. He's here. He's 14 months old, and I've missed every one of those months, and I am not going to... He stopped himself, brought the volume back down. I am not going to be absent from his life. I can discuss what that looks like. I am not going to discuss whether. She held his gaze, didn't look away. He'd always respected that about her, the way she held her ground even against things that were significantly larger than her in practical terms. Handle your mother, she said finally. Then come back, and we'll figure out what this looks like. It wasn't agreement, it wasn't trust. It was the provisional offer of a next step from someone who had been given no good options and was choosing the least bad one. He took it. At the door she said his name. He stopped, hand on the frame. Didn't turn. I didn't leave because I stopped, she said. I want you to know that. Whatever else you think about the last 3 years, I didn't leave because I stopped. He stood in the doorway for a moment. The ocean sound came through from outside, the low, persistent white noise of water against shore. He didn't turn around. I know, he said. He walked back out through the garden and through the gate and to the car where Victor was waiting, and he got in, and they drove north toward the city, and Raphael sat in the back seat and didn't say anything for a long time. Victor, after a while, said, Did you see him? On the monitor, sleeping. And? Raphael looked at his hands in his lap again. The knuckles. The scar. I need to see Cassandra, he said. Victor said nothing for a moment. Then, how do you want to handle it? Carefully, Raphael said, and then not carefully at all. The car moved north. The city came toward them on the horizon, its particular skyline against the late afternoon gray, the thing he had built his life inside of for 15 years. He looked at it through the window and felt, for the first time, the possibility that it was not the thing he had been building toward, that it had been something else entirely, something he hadn't had a name for, until a child turned its face in an airport terminal and showed him eyes that had been waiting all along to be recognized. The miles passed. Behind him, 4 hours south, in a crib in a dim room in a small house near the water, his son slept without knowing that everything was about to change. And in the city ahead, in the tower that bore the family name, Cassandra Voss poured wine into a crystal glass and looked at the skyline she believed she controlled, unaware that her son was driving toward her carrying something far more dangerous than anger. He was carrying the truth, and he had finally decided to use it. The drive north took 4 hours, and Raphael used none of them. He didn't sleep. He didn't look at his phone, though it buzzed twice with things Victor had flagged as requiring attention. He sat in the back of the car and watched the landscape change from the small weathered geography of the coast to the dense accumulating mass of the city, and he held one thought in his body, the way you hold something hot, carefully, with full attention to the pain of it. Cassandra. He had grown up understanding his mother the way soldiers understand terrain, not with love, not with hatred, but with the specific functional knowledge of something that shaped every move you made. He knew her angles. He knew the way she thought. He had learned early that she did not make decisions impulsively, that every action in her world was preceded by calculation, that when she moved it was because she had already mapped the consequence several steps beyond the obvious one. She had gone to Elena, not to warn him, not to bring the situation to him so he could handle it himself. She had gone around him, to a woman who was pregnant with his child, and she had used the name of a dead woman as a threat, and she had engineered the disappearance of something that belonged to him without ever telling him it existed. He understood the logic. That was the worst part. He sat in the back of the car and he understood exactly how she had reasoned it, step by step, the same cold architecture he had watched her use his entire life. Elena was an exposure. The child was a complication. Complications were managed. That was the word she used. Managed. Managed the way you managed weather, or debt, or difficult men. Neutralized before they became structural problems. She had managed him a son. He pressed his thumb against the scar on his index finger until the bone ached. Victor didn't speak. He understood the quality of this silence. When they reached the city, Raphael said, "Tomorrow morning, my office, not hers." "She'll know you're back." "I know. She'll have had time to—" "I know, Victor." Victor nodded and said nothing more. The office was on the 14th floor of a building that officially housed a property development firm, which it did in fact house, among other things. Raphael arrived at 7 in the morning, which was early enough that the building's legitimate tenants hadn't yet arrived, which was intentional. He wanted the floor quiet. He wanted the particular acoustic quality of an empty space when a difficult conversation happened in it. He told his assistant to have Cassandra there at 8. Cassandra arrived at 8:15. He noticed the 15 minutes. She would know he noticed. That was also intentional on her part. A small recalibration of the meeting's power geometry. A reminder that she came on her own schedule. He had watched her do this to other people his entire life. He had never, until now, been one of them. She came through the door in a charcoal suit, her hair pinned with the severity she preferred, the kind of put-together that communicated that she had been awake for hours and had used them productively. She was 61 and looked 53, which was not an accident. Cassandra did not permit accidents in things she could control. She sat in the chair across from his desk without being invited to sit, crossed her legs, and looked at him with the expression she used for difficult meetings. Present, attentive, and completely without vulnerability. "You're back earlier than expected," she said. "The coastal trip was brief." A pause of approximately 1 second. "I wasn't aware of a coastal trip." "No," Raphael said. "You weren't." She waited. Her stillness was different from his. Where his stillness came from something interior, from the absolute focus of everything on one point, hers was performed. It was a tool. He had watched her use it on men who unraveled in the face of silence, who filled the space with explanations that cost them. He did not fill the space. She spoke first. "Is there something specific on the agenda?" "Elena Marlowe." The name landed. He watched for the register, the small, involuntary thing that happened in even the most disciplined faces when something unexpected arrived. He saw it. A contraction around her eyes, quick, controlled, gone in under a second. If he hadn't been watching for it, he would have missed it. "I'm not sure I follow," she said. "I saw her 3 days ago, at the airport." "Raphael," she had a child with her. His voice was flat, surgical. 14 months old. A boy. His name is Noah, though that's a detail you presumably already knew. The stillness she maintained was a different kind now. He could feel the machinery working behind it, the assessment, the recalculation, the decision about which version of this conversation she was going to run. "I think," she said, "that this is a conversation that requires some context." "I have the context," he said. "She gave it to me. I drove 4 hours to a coastal town where she's been living under a different name for 3 years, and she told me exactly what happened. What I need from you is the part she couldn't tell me." "Which part?" "Why?" The words sat between them. Single syllable. No elaboration. Cassandra uncrossed her legs and recrossed them. The suit jacket settled. She looked at him the way she had looked at him since he was a child when he said something she was deciding how to answer, with the particular attention of someone who was not weighing truth against lies, but rather weighing versions of truth against each other. "You were at a critical juncture," she said. "The Harmon merger, the renegotiation with the Western ports, things that required—" "Stop," he said it quietly. "Don't give me the operational justification. I know the operational justification. You decided Elena was a liability and you removed her. I understand the logic. What I'm asking you is why you decided that was your decision to make." She held his gaze. "Because you weren't going to make it." "No, I wasn't." "Raphael," "Because she wasn't a liability." His voice was still flat, but something underneath it had changed temperature, and she heard it because she had been listening to his voice for 35 years. "She was a woman I loved. She was carrying my son. Those are not organizational liabilities. Those are mine." Cassandra's jaw moved. Not speaking, adjusting. The minute reconfiguration of someone who has held a position and is deciding whether to hold it further or shift it. You were 28 years old and you were building something that could have been destroyed by what? By a child? By a person who mattered to me? By exposure? By weakness? By the perception that there was something that could be used against you. She wasn't being used against me. She was with me. Until she wasn't. Cassandra's voice had found its edge. Not loud, never loud, but the particular sharpness she produced when she believed she was right and was done pretending otherwise. They always leave, Raphael, or they get taken, or they become something that someone else can hold over you. I have watched men destroyed by the things they refused to let go of, and I was not going to watch that happen to you. You made that decision for me. Yes. Without telling me. Yes. Oh, without giving me the option of choosing differently. She looked at him. Her face was doing the thing it did when she was certain, the particular stillness of absolute conviction. You would have chosen her, I know you. You would have chosen her, and you would have spent the next 5 years watching the choice cost you everything I built. And eventually, it would have cost her too, and the child, and I was not willing to… Stop. She stopped. You told her, he said. You went to the apartment on Mercer with a key you had no right to have, and you sat across from a woman who was carrying my son, and you told her about Solace. The name moved across Cassandra's face differently than Elena's had. Something more complex. Not guilt. He had never seen guilt operate in his mother's system. But something adjacent to it. Recognition, perhaps, of a specific weight being placed on the table. I told her the truth about what this world does to people, Cassandra said. I told her what the cost of staying looked like. That was not a threat. That was information. You used the death of a woman as a threat to drive a pregnant person out of the country. I used… She stopped herself. Reset. I gave her an accurate picture of the risks. And then you watched. Raphael leaned forward slightly. Just slightly. Enough to change the geometry. You watched me spend 6 months looking for her. You watched Victor run searches that came back empty. You watched me. He stopped, something in his throat. He worked past it. You watched all of it, and you said nothing. What would saying something have accomplished? It would have accomplished the truth. The truth would have accomplished you burning everything down for a woman who was safer where she was. He stood up. The movement was controlled, but it was definitive, and Cassandra's body registered it. The slight repositioning, the way her chin lifted, the adjustment of someone recalibrating physical space. He walked to the window. The city below moved in the particular dense rhythm of morning. Traffic, people, the choreography of commerce and routine that had been happening under him for 15 years. He looked at it, and it looked the same as it always had and meant something different than it always had. I have a son, he said to the window. She said nothing behind him. I have a son who is 14 months old and has been alive every one of those months without me knowing he existed. He has a name I didn't give him. He has a mother who has been raising him alone in a rented house 4 hours from here because you convinced her that the alternative was worse. He paused. Because you convinced her that I would choose this… He gestured briefly at the window, at the city, at the empire of it, over him. Wouldn't you have? She said. He turned. She was looking at him with the directness she only produced when she had committed to something, when the calculation was done and the position was held. At 28, with the merger in progress and the Western accounts unsettled, and the situation with Dragutin still unresolved, wouldn't you have chosen the work? He held her gaze. I don't know. I do. You don't. His voice was very quiet now. You don't know. Because you made the choice before I could make it. You decided what I would do, and then you arranged the world so that I didn't have to do anything. You removed the question so you wouldn't have to live with my answer. Something moved in Cassandra's face. The first true movement, not the small controlled registrations of before, but something larger, something that had been held back by the machinery and had found a crack in it. She pressed her mouth together. I did what was necessary, she said. For who? For you, for the organization, for you, Raphael said. Because you have spent 40 years building something, and you are not going to let a woman and a child and whatever I might have felt about them threaten the structure of it. That's the truth, Mother. You can dress it in whatever language you want, but that is the center of it. She stood. Not quickly, with the deliberateness of someone who was choosing to stand, who wanted the choice to be visible. She smoothed the front of her jacket. She looked at him with an expression he had seen before, one she used when a meeting had arrived at its terminal point. You're upset, she said. That's understandable, but when you've had time to— I'm going back to them, he said. She stopped. I'm going back to Elena and to Noah, and I'm going to be present in their lives, and I'm going to do whatever that requires. If that means changes to the organization, those changes will happen. If that means restructuring how things operate, they will be restructured. Raphael. Her voice had changed. The boardroom edge was gone. Something older was underneath it. Something that, in another family and another life, might have been called maternal. You don't understand what you're risking. I understand exactly what I'm risking. The Harmon Group will see instability. Dragutin has been waiting for a— Let him wait. You can't simply— I'm not asking your permission. He crossed back toward the desk, and she held her ground, but the ground was smaller than it had been. I'm telling you what is going to happen, and I'm telling you something else. He stopped close enough that the conversation was between them and nothing else. What you did to Elena, what you threatened her with, that's done. There is no version of what comes next where that is permitted to continue. If I find out that you've made any contact with her, with Noah, with anyone connected to them, that is a line. You understand what I mean when I say that. Cassandra looked at him for a long time. Her face had gone to something he hadn't seen on it before, or hadn't seen and recognized before. Something that might have been, underneath everything she had built over 61 years, the face of a woman who had just understood that she had miscalculated something fundamental. He's my grandson, she said, quietly. The first quiet thing she had said. He is, Raphael said, and what you do with that is your decision. But it happens on my terms, not yours. She picked up her bag from beside the chair. She moved to the door. At the door she turned. You think love makes you stronger, she said. I thought that once. He said nothing. It doesn't make you stronger, Raphael. It makes you a different kind of target. She left. The door closed with a sound that was almost nothing, the small mechanical click of a latch engaging, and Raphael stood in the empty office and listened to the building settle around him and breathed through the thing in his chest that had no clean name. Victor was in the outer room. He came in without being called, which meant he had been listening to enough to know when the conversation was over. He sat down across from the desk with the ease of a man who had been in difficult rooms with Raphael Voss for a long time and had learned which silences required response and which required only presence. She's going to move, Victor said. Yes. You gave her time to move, telling her directly, I know. She's going to cut. Victor. Raphael sat down, pressed his hands flat on the desk, looked at them. I know what she's going to do. I need you to get ahead of it. How far ahead? As far as you can. He paused. I need eyes on the Harmon channel. If she reaches out to them in the next 72 hours, I need to know immediately. Dragutin? Same. He paused again. And I need someone on the house, the coastal house. Quiet. Elena can't know about it, but I need someone there. Victor looked at him. You think she'd move against them? I think I just told her that her position in this organization is conditional on my terms for the first time in the history of this organization. I think she is a woman who has spent 40 years ensuring that no position she held was conditional on anyone's terms but her own. He paused. I think I don't know exactly what she'll do, and that's the problem. Victor nodded once. I'll make calls. He started to stand. Raphael said, There's something else. Victor waited. The woman named Solis. Whatever file exists on that situation, however old, however sealed, I need it. Something moved across Victor's face. Brief. That's old business, before your time mostly. I know. Some of what's in there. Bring it to me anyway. Victor was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded and left. Raphael sat alone. Outside the window, the city continued. It didn't know anything had changed. It would keep not knowing for a while, which was fine. The city didn't need to know yet. He pulled out his phone and opened the contact he had created during the 11 days of searching. The number he had for Elena, the new one, the one under the name Claire Vance. He had not used it yet. He had gone in person instead, because some things required the specific weight of physical presence, and he had understood that about this particular encounter. He looked at the number. He put the phone down. He thought about Noah in the crib on the monitor screen, the arm flung out, the total committed sleep, the dark hair that he recognized and the features that were still becoming whatever they were going to be, and the eyes that were already exactly what they were going to be. He thought about Elena in the garden, trowel in her hand, not dropping it even after she saw him. He thought about what Cassandra had said on her way out the door, and about the name Solis, and about the particular quality of his mother's face when she'd said, "He's my grandson," in that quiet voice. The first quiet thing. The first thing that didn't have the structure of the boardroom in it. He thought about what it meant that she had gone to Elena with a key she wasn't supposed to have, and had known about the pregnancy before Elena had found a way to tell him, which meant she had known about Elena in ways that Raphael had not known she knew, which meant she had been watching, not just since the beginning of the Harmon situation, before that. She had been watching Elena the way she watched everything that entered her son's orbit, with the systematic thoroughness of a woman who managed assets and liabilities on a continuous basis, who had a category for things that mattered to people she needed to control, who had been assessing the Elena situation long before Elena became pregnant. The thought arrived with the cold clarity of something that should have been obvious sooner. His phone buzzed. Victor, a text. Harmon's assistant called Cassandra's office 20 minutes ago. Her people took the call. 20 minutes ago. She had left the building and made a call before she reached the elevator. Raphael stared at the text. He had given her the truth, and she had weaponized it before the door finished closing. He picked up the phone and called Victor directly. Where is she now? Car, heading toward her building. Get me the Harmon contact. Direct, not through her channel. You're going to call Harmon yourself. Yes. A pause. That burns the way things have been structured. I know. If she finds out you went around her, she's already moving against me, Victor. I just didn't know it until this morning. He stood. Get me the number. He moved to the window again. The city below, unchanged. The same machinery, the same motion, the same accumulated weight of everything he had spent 15 years building inside it. He thought of Noah asleep. He thought of Elena saying, "Handle your mother," with the flatness of someone making a conditional agreement they weren't sure they believed in yet. He thought of Cassandra's final words. It makes you a different kind of target. And the strange thing was, she was right, and he had already known it when she said it, and it had not changed anything. His phone buzzed again. Victor with the number. He looked at it. Outside, somewhere in the city, Cassandra was in a car making calculations. In 4 hours south of here, Elena was in a small house near the water, not knowing that the meeting he'd just had was already generating consequences she hadn't anticipated. And somewhere in that house, in a dim room, a 14-month-old boy was either still sleeping or waking into a morning that looked the same as every other morning he had lived, because he was too young to know that mornings could change. Raphael dialed the Harmon number. It rang twice. When it picked up, he said his name, and he heard the sharp intake of breath on the other end. The recognition, the sudden recalculation of what this call meant. The particular quality of a man understanding that the architecture of the arrangement he was in had just shifted in ways he hadn't been told about. "We need to talk," Raphael said, "without intermediaries. Tonight." A pause. "Mr. Voss, Your mother typically handles—" "My mother," Raphael said, "is not handling this." The silence on the other end had the density of a man making a very fast decision about which way to fall. "Tonight," Raphael said again. "My office, 9 o'clock. He ended the call. He stood at the window for a moment longer, the phone still in his hand, the city still doing what cities did, and he felt the shape of what he had just set in motion. Not one thing, but several, radiating outward from a single decision the way consequences always did. And somewhere in the radius of those consequences was a woman in a garden and a child in a crib and a mother in a car who had already decided what came next. He had until 9 o'clock to decide what came next first. His phone rang. Not Victor. Not Harmon. A number he didn't recognize. Coastal area code. And his chest did something involuntary before his brain caught up. He answered. Elena's voice came through flat and controlled, and underneath the control, something that sounded like the beginning of a very specific kind of fear. "Someone is outside the house," she said. "A car. It's been there for 40 minutes. Raphael, I have Noah here, and there is a car outside my house that wasn't there this morning, and I need to know right now if that's yours." "That's mine," Raphael said. "Pull back," he told Victor immediately after. "Tell them to move now. 3 blocks minimum." A pause on Elena's end. He could hear her breathing, fast, controlled, the specific rhythm of someone who had been managing fear for long enough that they knew how to keep it functional. "You put surveillance on my house," she said. "I put protection on your house. Without telling me. I was going to shits. Without telling me, Raphael." The fear had converted, the way it did in people with backbone, into something harder and hotter. "I have been hiding for 3 years specifically so that no one knows where I am. And you had someone sitting outside my house. Cassandra moved the second she left my office. I needed someone there." Silence. The specific silence of someone absorbing information and reconfiguring around it. "You told her." "Yes." "You told her, and she moved immediately." "Yes." Another silence. Longer. He could hear in it the particular quality of a person reassessing the terms of an agreement they had only just made. "The car," Elena said. "Is it gone?" He looked at Victor, who nodded, phone to his ear. "It's moving," Raphael said. "Give it 30 seconds." He heard her go to a window, heard the sound of the house. Quiet. The low ambient sound of a space where a small child lived. Some object being moved somewhere. A door. Then, "Okay, it's gone." "Elena, don't." Her voice had gone flat. "I need a minute." He gave her the minute. He stood at his office window and watched the city and gave her the minute. "You need to tell me," she said finally, "exactly what she said. Every word. Because if she's moving, I need to understand what I'm dealing with." She called Harmon before she was out of the building. A breath, sharp. "Harmon, the merger. She's using the organization to push back. She's going to try to make me look unstable, create pressure through the financial channels." That's internal to your world, Raphael. What does that mean for Noah?" He was quiet for a moment. "I don't know yet. That is not an acceptable answer." "I know. He's 14 months old." Her voice cracked on it. Not broke, cracked. The specific sound of something under enormous pressure finding a hairline fracture. He cannot be in the middle of whatever this is. He won't be. You cannot promise that. "I'm promising it anyway." She was quiet. He heard her move. The sound of her footsteps on the floor, the creak of a door, and then a change in the acoustic quality that meant she was in the room with Noah, checking the automatic movement of a parent toward the thing they were protecting. "I'm coming down," he said. "Raphael, not tonight, tomorrow morning. I have a meeting tonight that I need to get ahead of this. Tomorrow morning, early, and we are going to sit down, and you are going to tell me everything about the last 3 years, and I am going to tell you everything about what happened in that office today, and then we are going to figure out what comes next." A long pause. "Bring Victor," she said. "I want someone else in the room." He understood why. He didn't argue. "Okay." He ended the call and stood with the phone in his hand and breathed for a moment, and then he turned to the desk and started working because there was nothing left but the work and the 9 o'clock meeting and the next 12 hours that would determine what shape everything after them took. Harmon came at 9:15 instead of 9. It was the same power geometry move Cassandra had used that morning, the same 14-minute message, and Raphael noted it with the flat attention he gave to everything that was intended to communicate something about the relative weight of people in a room. He let Harmon sit in the outer office for 4 minutes before having him brought in, which communicated the response. Gerald Harmon was 67, built like a man who had been large once and had reduced to something denser over time, with the careful grooming of someone whose financial exposure made appearance a professional instrument. He sat across from Raphael's desk and put his hands on his knees and looked at Raphael with the expression of a man who had been doing business with the Voss organization for 8 years and had learned something this morning that had reorganized his understanding of the arrangement. "Mr. Voss," he said. "Gerald?" Harmon waited. "You spoke to my mother this morning," Raphael said. "Her office reached out, yes. She told you there were concerns about the stability of leadership." Harmon's jaw moved. "She expressed some—" "Gerald," Raphael leaned forward slightly. "We've done business for 8 years. I want to do the next 8 with the same efficiency. What I don't want is to spend those years operating through a channel that has a separate agenda, so I'm asking you directly. What did she tell you?" Harmon looked at him for a moment. The calculation in the look was visible, so the weighing of loyalties, the assessment of risk on multiple sides, the particular arithmetic of a man trying to determine which version of this situation was most survivable. "She told me," Harmon said carefully, "that there was a personal matter that might affect your decision-making in the near term. She suggested that the Western port negotiation might benefit from a delay, a pause until things were more settled. A pause." Her word. "And she suggested that you might recommend this pause to the other Harmon partners." "She suggested it might be prudent, yes." Raphael sat back. He looked at Harmon for a long moment, long enough that Harmon's hands tightened slightly on his knees and then deliberately loosened, the controlled relaxation of a man who didn't want his tells read. "The personal matter," Raphael said. "Did she describe it?" "In general terms?" "What terms?" Harmon hesitated. "She said you had discovered a prior relationship had produced a child, and that you were emotionally compromised as a result." The phrase emotionally compromised sat in the room with a specific weight that Raphael allowed to exist without reacting to it visibly. "She used that phrase?" "Yes." "Did she say anything else?" Another hesitation, longer. Harmon's eyes moved briefly to the window and back, the involuntary look of a man searching for an exit route before deciding to walk through the door. "She said that the child's existence created a vulnerability, that people who wanted leverage against you now had a viable target." Raphael went completely still. "She said this," he said. "Yes. To you. This morning." In the call, yes. He had known, when he saw Victor's text, that she was moving fast. He had understood she was using Harmon as a pressure point against him, positioning herself as the stable center of the organization against an emotionally destabilized son. He had walked into this meeting prepared for that version of the conversation. He had not been prepared for her to have described Noah as a viable target to a business associate. He had not been prepared for her to have turned his son into leverage in the first hours after learning that Raphael knew. The room was very quiet. "Gerald," he said, and his voice had the flatness of something that had passed through temperature and come out on the other side of it. "The Western port negotiation proceeds on the original timeline. Nothing is paused. If anyone reaches out to you or to your partners suggesting otherwise, you tell me immediately, directly, not through any channel that runs through my mother's office." Harmon nodded. One nod. The nod of a man who had just determined which side of this he was standing on and wanted to make it visible. "Understood." "Good." Raphael stood. "We're done for tonight." Harmon stood, collected himself, and left with the efficiency of a man who is grateful to be leaving. When the outer door closed, Victor came in from the side entrance. "You heard," Raphael said. "I heard. She told Harmon that Noah was a viable target for leverage." "I know." "She didn't say it as a threat against me." He moved to the window. "She said it as a description of reality, as an observation. He paused. That's worse. Yes, Victor said. It means she's already thought about who else might come to that same conclusion. Who else in the landscape might see the child and see an angle? He pressed his fingers against the cold glass. It means she's been thinking about this longer than today. Victor was quiet for a moment, then, the Solis file came in while you were with Harmon. Raphael turned. It's not short. When is it ever? Victor set a drive on the desk. There are things in there I didn't know about, and I've been with you 15 years. Something in the way he said it, the specific flat quality of it, the careful non-inflection of a man who had seen difficult things and was communicating that these were in a different category, made the back of Raphael's neck go cold. I'll read it tonight, Raphael said. He did. It took him 3 hours. He sat in the study, the room with the blue chair that he had never moved, and he read the file on the drive, and by the end of the first hour he understood why Victor had said what he'd said in the way he'd said it. By the end of the second hour he understood something about his mother that reorganized the entire architecture of everything he thought he had known about the organization and about her and about himself inside both of those things. Solis had not been a business complication. Solis had been a woman, younger, connected to a man in the organization who had held leverage over a particular port operation that Cassandra needed clean access to. The man had been intractable. The woman had been the solution. Not removed, not relocated, made to not exist in the way that things were sometimes made to not exist in the operational history of organizations like this one. Cassandra had ordered it, not through intermediary language, not through the kind of euphemism that created plausible distance, directly. On record, in the file, in her own handwriting on a note that had been preserved with the careful thoroughness of someone keeping documentation of their own decisions. She had kept the record herself, which meant she had wanted it documented, which meant she had used it, after, as something other than a piece of operational history. He found the evidence of that on the third pass through the file. Cross-referencing with 2 other situations, both involving women connected to men in the organization who had become inconvenient. Both resolved the same way. Both documented in the same handwriting, in the same format, preserved in the same archive. A pattern. A tool. Used at least 3 times that the file recorded, possibly more that it didn't. She had shown Elena the file. She had shown Elena a woman's name and said, "This is what happens," and Elena had believed it and left. And Raphael had spent 3 years not knowing his son existed, and Cassandra had kept the records of every Solis pattern decision she had ever made in an archive that she apparently had believed was secure. It had not been secure. Victor had gotten into it in 1 day, which meant other people could get into it, which meant it existed as liability in ways that Cassandra, for all her calculation, had apparently decided to accept, because the value of having the documentation available to use outweighed the risk of its existence. He sat in the blue chair with the file closed on the table beside him and looked at the middle distance for a long time. He thought about Elena in the apartment on Mercer, 8 weeks pregnant, a woman he loved sitting across from his mother being shown documentation of what happened to women who became inconvenient, being told in the specific language of someone who kept records of their own actions that this was the alternative. He thought about what it had taken for Elena to run, what it had taken for her to take nothing and go somewhere she had no roots and build a life in the shape of a woman named Claire Vance, 4 hours from everything she knew, for 3 years alone. He thought about what it had taken to do that while pregnant. He stood up. He went to the window in the study and stood in the dark and looked at nothing. Then he went back to the desk and called Victor. "The Solis file," he said when Victor picked up. "The pattern. I saw it. How many people know this exists? Before tonight, Cassandra, whatever legal exposure she was managing internally. Possibly 2 or 3 operational people who were involved at the time and who are either still loyal to her or no longer a factor. And now, you, me. Is there legal exposure from my side? Depends what you do with it. I'm going to use it." Victor was quiet for a moment. "Against her." "Yes. That's..." A pause. "That's walking into a courtroom, Raphael, If this goes to outside parties, I'm not going to outside parties. I'm going to her. He paused. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to Elena's first. Tomorrow evening, I'm going to Cassandra. And I'm going to tell her what I found, and I'm going to make it clear that the documentation goes somewhere she doesn't want it to go if she makes another move. Toward Harmon, toward Noah, toward anything I care about. She'll call it a bluff. It's not a bluff. Another pause, longer. Raphael. Victor's voice had the specific weight of a man who was about to say something he had been holding. If you burn this, if you actually use this against her, you understand that she will not. She is not the kind of person who accepts that position. She will find something equivalent. She has been building ammunition against everyone who has ever been able to threaten her for 40 years. She has... He stopped. I need to tell you something. Raphael went still. I found something else on the drive while I was looking for the Solis material. The cold at the back of his neck returned. What? There's a file. Your name on it. A pause that had weight in it. It goes back 14 years. 14 years. Raphael had been 21, just entering the organization in any serious capacity. Still learning the architecture of what Cassandra had built, still understanding what it was he had been born into. What's in it? He said. Documentation. Of decisions. Attributed to you. Victor paused again. Decisions you didn't make, Raphael. Decisions she made in the early years when she was running things through you. When your name was on the accounts and the authorizations, before you had the experience to know what you were signing. She kept those records, under your name, as yours. The room had a sound in it that was actually the absence of sound, the specific quality of a space where something large had just arrived and was taking up all the air. How much? He said. Enough. Victor's voice was flat. If those records went somewhere, to the right investigators, with the right framing, the picture that emerges is not of Cassandra Voss running an organization through her son. It's of Raphael Voss running an operation that his mother was largely uninvolved in. You take the exposure, she walks away clean. He stood very still. He had walked into his mother's office that morning believing he held something, a truth, a leverage, a record of her actions that she didn't know he had access to. He had walked in feeling, for the first time in the long history of their relationship, that the balance had shifted. She had built the imbalance into the architecture 14 years ago. She had built it as insurance. The way she built everything, not because she thought she would need it immediately, but because she understood that the future was uncertain and that certainty had to be manufactured in advance. She had manufactured a version of events in which, if Raphael ever came for her, she could send him to the exposure instead. He was the exposure. He had been the exposure for 14 years without knowing it. His phone buzzed. Not Victor. He was already on with Victor. His second line. He looked at the screen. Elena. 2:15 in the morning. He felt something cold move through him. He switched lines. Elena? There's a man at my door. Her voice was very quiet and very controlled, and underneath the control, something that was not fear anymore. Something on the other side of fear, the place you went when fear had completed its work, and what was left was just the raw animal of it. He knocked twice. I didn't answer. He hasn't left. Where's Noah? I moved him. He's in the back room. Raphael, is your door locked? Yes, both locks. Windows. Closed. I checked. He was already moving, away from the desk, toward the door, the coat, the car keys he didn't need because he had a driver, but reached for anyway with the instinct of someone who needed to move right now, and the body was providing options before the brain had finished processing. Victor, he said, switching, merging both lines in his awareness simultaneously. Someone is at Elena's door, right now. Get someone there. Fastest possible. Already moving, Victor said. 20 minutes. 20 minutes. 4 hours away, his people were 20 minutes out because he had maintained the presence in the area after pulling the car back. 20 minutes was not nothing, but it was not nothing in the wrong direction. He switched back to Elena. Stay on the line. Don't open the door. Don't make noise that tells him where in the house you are. I know, she said. Quiet. The quiet of someone who had thought about versions of this for 3 years and had contingency plans the way careful people did. He was in the elevator, the building lobby, the car at the curb, driver already behind the wheel because Victor had called ahead. He got in. Drive, he said. South, fast. The car pulled out, and Raphael sat in the back with his phone in both hands, and Elena's breathing on one line and Victor's logistics on the other, and outside the city moved past at the speed of urgency. He's knocking again, Elena said. Soft, almost a whisper. Don't answer. I'm not. A pause. A breath. Noah woke up. I've got him. He's quiet. The image of it. Elena in the dark of the back room, holding a 14-month-old boy against her chest, trying to keep him quiet while someone knocked on her door at 2 a.m, moved through Raphael with the specific quality of something that had passed the border of anger and entered a territory that didn't have the same name. Who sent him? Elena said. Not a question, a statement. She already knew the answer. Raphael said nothing. Your mother, she said. Still the whisper, still controlled. 3 years I hid from this, and the moment you tell her I exist, someone is at my door at 2 a.m. He couldn't argue with it. My people are 18 minutes out. And what does this man do in 18 minutes? He knocks, Raphael said. That's what he's been told to do. This is a message. She's sending me a message through your door. Through my door. Elena's voice had something in it that was the word he hadn't found for the territory past anger. Through my door with Noah in my arms. I know. You said he wouldn't be in the middle of this. I know. You said, Elena. His voice broke the pattern. Not loud, not harsh, but definitive. I know what I said. I know I was wrong. And I need you to stay very still and very quiet for 16 more minutes, and then my people will be there, and you will not be alone in that house anymore. A silence. Long enough that he checked the line to make sure it was still connected. Okay, she said. He rode south in the back of the car with the city giving way to highway and the highway giving way to distance, and he held both phones and he thought about his mother in her building, awake at 2 a.m. Because she would be awake, she didn't sleep well. She never had. Making a call to someone who drove to a small coastal town and knocked on a door, not to enter, just to knock, just to let him know she had the address and the access and the willingness. He thought about the file on the drive with his name on it. 14 years of decisions attributed to him. 14 years of liability built into the record with the careful handwriting of a woman who kept documentation of her own actions because documentation was a tool. He had walked into her office that morning believing he was the one with the weapon. He understood now that he had never, in 35 years, been the one with the weapon. He had been the weapon. And she had just demonstrated at 2 a.m. through a knocked-on door 4 hours away that she still knew how to aim it. Victor came back on. Our people are at the street. 2 minutes. Elena, Raphael said. 2 minutes. He's still there, she said. 2 minutes. He heard her breathing. He heard Noah make a small sound in Elena's hand moving, the rustle of fabric, the sound of a child being held by someone who was holding themselves together through the holding of it. Then Victor, they're at the door, our people. Then Elena, there's a car on the street. 2 men got out. A pause. The man at my door, he's leaving. He just turned and walked away. Raphael let out a breath he had been holding for 18 minutes. They're going to stay outside, he said. Both of them, all night. You're not alone. Silence. Elena, I hear you, she said. Are you okay? A pause that was longer than it needed to be. Noah went back to sleep, she said. He doesn't know. He's too young to know. Another pause. I'm not okay, but I'm not hurt. He nodded at nothing. I'll be there by morning. She said nothing for a moment, then, Raphael, whatever you're going to do about your mother, she stopped, started again. Do it fast, because I can't live like this. I can't raise him like this. I spent 3 years building something safe, and I can't. Her voice found the crack again, the hairline one. I can't let that be what his life is. It won't be. You keep saying things like that. I know. At some point, you have to do something instead of saying it. He looked out the window at the dark highway, the headlights cutting into the nothing ahead of him. I know, he said again. I'm on my way. He ended the call and sat in the dark car and thought about everything that was true tonight that hadn't been true this morning. He thought about a 14-year-old file with his name on it. He thought about a woman named Solis and what her documentation meant, and what it had been designed for, and how long it had been sitting in an archive being kept ready for a moment exactly like this one. He thought about Noah asleep again in the back room of a small house, too young to know that someone had come to the door tonight because of what he was, because of whose he was, because in the specific terrible logic of the world Raphael had been born into, a child was either a tool or a target, and there was no third option that didn't require someone to fight for it. He had walked into his mother's office this morning thinking he was fighting. He understood now that the fight was different than he'd known, and the cost was higher than he'd priced it, and the only move left was the one that scared him most. Not because it was violent, not because it was dangerous in any of the ways he had learned to measure danger, but because it required him to become something he had never been in the 35 years he had been building everything else. It required him to be willing to lose the thing he'd spent his whole life constructing in order to protect the thing he'd only just found out he had. He pressed his forehead briefly against the cold glass of the car window. The highway moved under them, the dark moved overhead. By morning he would be there. He didn't know yet if by morning would be enough. He arrived at the coastal house at 6:14 in the morning. The sun was coming up wrong, flat and pale, the kind of light that didn't warm anything, that just made the darkness visible in increments. The ocean beyond the houses was gray, and the street was gray, and the two men Victor had stationed outside were standing by their car with the specific stillness of people who had been awake all night and had converted tiredness into something functional through practice. Raphael got out of the car and nodded at them and went to the door and knocked twice. Elena opened it immediately. She had not slept. He could see that in the first second, the particular hollowness around her eyes, the way she was holding herself with the careful deliberateness of someone running on the fumes of adrenaline that had never fully discharged. She was dressed. She had Noah against her left shoulder, awake now, the child's dark eyes moving to Raphael's face with the unguarded directness of someone who had not yet learned to conceal curiosity. Those eyes. Up close, in daylight, without the gray mediation of a monitor screen, they were exact. The shape of them, the depth of color, the particular intensity, exact. Like looking at a photograph of himself taken in some other dimension where everything was softer and hadn't been used yet. Raphael stood on the threshold and looked at his son for the first time in daylight and didn't move for a moment. Noah looked back at him. Then Noah reached out one small hand toward Raphael's face with the absolute confidence of a creature who had not yet been taught that the world required more caution than curiosity, and Raphael's chest did something that had no equivalent in any previous experience he could reference. "Come in," Elena said. Quiet. Exhausted. He came in. They sat at the kitchen table with coffee that Elena made with the automatic efficiency of someone who needed the activity of making it as much as the result. Noah sat in a high chair between them, working at something in a bowl with the committed intensity of a person for whom eating was still a serious undertaking, requiring full concentration. The two of them watched him for a moment in a silence that wasn't comfortable but was at least shared. The specific, shared silence of two people looking at the same thing and feeling its weight differently, and knowing they were both feeling it. "Tell me everything," Elena said. "From the beginning. What was in the file?" He told her. All of it. The Solis pattern, the 3 documented cases, the handwriting, the archive. Then the second file. His name. 14 years of attributed decisions that were not his decisions. The liability structure his mother had built into the organization's records in the early years when he was 21 and still learning what he was signing. Elena listened without interrupting. She wrapped both hands around her coffee mug and listened with the focused stillness of someone who was processing as she received, building a structure out of the information in real time. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Noah made a sound of satisfaction about something in the bowl. She built you as her exit, Elena said. Yes. If anything ever came for the organization, she built a record that puts it all on you and walks her out clean. Yes. And you've been running that organization for how long at full authority? 8 years. So for 8 years, you've been the face of it, making real decisions, building real relationships, while underneath all of that, there's a layer of documentation from the first 7 years that frames the whole thing as yours from the start. Yes. She set down the mug. And the Solis material, so does that help you or hurt you? It documents her ordering something that would destroy her publicly if it reached the right people. But it's in an archive that was accessed through methods that... He paused. It's complicated. Everything you have on her is complicated. Yes. And everything she has on you is clean. Documented, preserved, in her handwriting, but with my name. Elena looked at him across the table. Noah had moved on from the bowl and was looking at Raphael again with the same unguarded directness as before, the studying look of a child assembling a picture of something new. So when you go to her tonight, I'm going this morning. Her eyes sharpened. Raphael, I'm not waiting. She sent someone to your door at 2 a.m. She called Harmon before she was out of my building. Every hour I wait is an hour she uses. He looked at his son. I'm not giving her more hours. Elena pressed her lips together. And your play? What are you actually going to do? I'm going to present the Solis documentation and tell her it goes to 3 specific people if she doesn't stand down, completely, from the organization, from the account she controls, from any channel that touches Harmon or anyone else in the network. She'll say it's a bluff. Let her. And if she calls it, he met Elena's eyes, then I send it, and I take whatever comes with it, including what comes from the file with my name. Elena stared at him. I know what it could do. You could lose everything. The organization, the accounts, I know. Raphael. She leaned forward. Her voice had the specific urgency of someone who was not arguing against the decision, but needed him to have fully weighted it. You have spent 15 years building that. It's not just money or power. It's the only structure you've ever lived inside. If it comes apart, then it comes apart. He looked at Noah. Noah was still looking at him, one hand now gripping the edge of the high chair tray, practicing the grip. I'm not going to let her use him. I'm not going to let her use the possibility of him to keep me inside a structure she built to contain me. I've been inside it for 35 years. He looked back at Elena. I'm done. She held his gaze for a long moment. Something moved in her face. Not softening, still not that, but something that was the first movement in a direction adjacent to it. Be careful, she said. I will. I mean it. Don't underestimate the response. If she thinks you're actually going to use it, she won't just negotiate. I know what she'll do. Do you? He stood, looked at Noah one more time. The grip on the tray, the eyes, the absolute present tense aliveness of a person who was 14 months old and had no knowledge of any of this and was simply here, in the morning, working on the basic project of existing. He reached out and put one hand briefly on top of Noah's head. The child went still. That stillness Elena had described, the operating system focus, and looked up at him. Raphael took his hand away. His palm felt the absence of the warmth. I'll be back tonight, he said. The confrontation happened in Cassandra's building. Raphael chose her territory deliberately. He wanted her to know he wasn't afraid of her ground. He wanted every element of the meeting to communicate that the balance had shifted, and that he understood it had shifted, and that he was not coming to negotiate from a position of desperation, but from a position of someone who had already made the decision and was now executing it. He arrived at 11. Her assistant, a woman named Petra, who had worked for Cassandra for 12 years, and who knew the quality of every silence in that office, showed him in with an expression that was professionally neutral and personally alert, the face of someone who could feel the pressure system of the meeting before it began. Cassandra was at her desk. She didn't stand when he came in. She looked up from whatever she was reading or performing the reading of and waited. He sat down across from her without being invited to sit. He put the drive on the desk between them. She looked at it, then at him. What is this? The soulless archive. The stillness, the controlled micro-response, the eyes, the jaw, the hands that had been resting on the desk surface and now pressed down slightly, the fingertips going white at the tips. Where did you get that? Does it matter? Raphael? The pattern is documented 3 times, he said. Your handwriting, your authorization. The most recent is 8 years ago. The oldest is 19. He paused. 19 years ago, I was 16. I had no involvement in what was on this organization, and those records will reflect that very clearly. She looked at the drive for a moment, then back at him. Something had happened to her face. Not collapse, Cassandra did not collapse, but a reorganization. The boardroom layer, the 61 years of constructed management, was still present, but underneath it something else was visible now. Something older than the construction, something that had been there before she built everything on top of it. What do you want? She said. Complete withdrawal. From the Harmon channel. From the port negotiation. From every operational decision that currently runs through your office. He paused. And I want the file. The one with my name. Every copy. Every backup. Whatever documentation you've preserved from the first 7 years that frames those decisions as mine. Her jaw moved. You're asking me to walk away from... Yes. I built this organization. You built it with material that included me. I'm taking my material back. She stood. Not quickly. With the deliberateness she always used. The visible choice. She moved to the window. The same window he had stood at in his own office the day before. And she looked at the city in the specific way people looked at things they had decided were theirs. If I walk away, she said, the organization becomes unstable. The people who've been operating in my layer, they won't simply transfer loyalty to you. Some of them will see the vacuum, and that's my problem. It's not just your problem. The exposure, Cassandra. He stood, moved toward her, stopped 10 feet from her. Not close, not crowding, just close enough to be in the same space unambiguously. I know about the file with my name. She turned. Her face was very still. I know what it was built for, he said. I know that if you chose to use it, the picture that emerges puts the early years on me and walks you clean. I know that's been sitting in your archive for 14 years as insurance. He paused. I'm telling you to use it or not use it, but either way, the soulless documentation goes to 3 people I've already identified if you make another move. Against me. Against Elena. Against Noah. He paused again. Use the file on me if you want. I'll take what comes. But so will you. She looked at him for a long time. The silence in the room had a different quality than the silences earlier in the week. This one had the quality of something that had reached its terminal state, not building toward anything, not compressing, just present. The final form of something that had been building for a long time. You'd burn yourself to burn me, she said. Yes. You'd take on the exposure from 14 years of records to make sure Noah is not a tool in your hand. Yes. She looked at him. She was doing something he had never seen her do. Not in boardrooms, not in confrontations with rival organizations, not in any moment of their shared history that he could access. She was reconsidering. Not the decision, not the position, but something deeper than those. The architecture beneath them, the long structure of assumption about who he was and what he would protect and what the limits of his willingness were. She had built those assumptions over 35 years. He was watching her discover they were wrong. He's my grandson, she said. The same words as before, the same quiet. You sent someone to his door at 2 a.m. That was... She stopped. That was not directed at the child. It was directed at his mother. While he was in her arms, she pressed her mouth together. What did you think she would do? He said. When someone knocked on her door at 2 a.m. while she was holding a 14-month-old child, what did you think that would feel like? I thought it would communicate urgency to you. It did. His voice was very quiet. It communicated that you're willing to use him, that you've already looked at him and seen a lever, and I'm telling you, as clearly as I am able to tell you anything, that is the last time. She looked at him. Then she did something he had not anticipated. She sat down, not at the desk, in the chair beside the window, the one that wasn't her power position, the one that was just a chair. She sat in it, and for a moment she looked like something he hadn't seen in her face since he was very young, and the world was different, and everything between them had a different shape. She looked tired. I made a calculation, she said, 3 years ago. I made a calculation that I still believe was correct given the information I had and the circumstances at the time. I know. I'm not asking you to understand it. I know you don't. She looked at her own hands in her lap. I'm telling you I didn't do it because it was easy. I did it because I believed it was necessary. And now, she was quiet for a moment. Now I'm looking at you, and I'm seeing something I didn't anticipate. She paused. You're going to actually do it. Burn yourself down to protect them. Yes. That's not something I built into you. No, he said. It isn't. She looked at him for a long moment. The city outside continued. The day moved through the window. What happens to me, she said, if I give you what you're asking? You step back from operations, from the accounts you control, from Harmon and the Western ports and every active channel. He paused. What you've built doesn't disappear, you just stop running it. And the Solis documentation stays where it is. No one sees it as long as you stay back. She absorbed this. Her face was doing things he couldn't fully read, which was itself unusual. He had spent 35 years learning to read her, and now the expression was something outside his reference set. Something that might have been, in a different context and a different person, a form of grief. The file with your name, she said. I want it gone. If I give you that... She paused. If those records are destroyed, there are things in the organizational history that become my problem, he said. I told you. She looked at him. All of it becomes my problem, he said. I'm not asking you to protect me from it. I'm asking you to stop using it as a cage. The room was very quiet. Then Cassandra reached into the desk drawer and put a second drive on the table beside his. He looked at it. Copy and original, she said. Everything attributed to you from the first 7 years. The authorizations, the account records, the early port documentation. She paused. I kept 2 copies. That's both. He looked at the drive, then at her. And Harmon, he said. I'll withdraw. The Western ports. Yes. Everything active. Yes. Her voice was very flat. Flat in the way of something that had come to a decision and was past the processing of it. Everything active. He stood. She didn't move. She sat in the chair beside the window and looked at the drives on the table and didn't look at him. He has your eyes, she said, quietly. To the table or the window or nothing in particular. He picked up both drives. I know, he said. He walked to the door. Raphael. He stopped, didn't turn. I made a mistake, she said. Not the calculation. I still believe the calculation was correct at the time, but the method. A pause. The Mercer apartment, using the documentation to frighten her, that was... She stopped. I shouldn't have involved her in the operational logic. She wasn't operational. She was yours, and I treated her like a resource. Another pause. That was a mistake. He stood at the door. It was the closest thing to an acknowledgement he was going to get. He understood that. He understood its shape and its limits and the distance between it and the word he actually wanted from her. He held all of that and said nothing for a moment. I know, he said again. He left. He was 3 blocks from Cassandra's building, in the car heading south, when Victor called. Problem, Victor said. Raphael's jaw tightened. What? Dragutin's people reached out. They want a meeting, tonight. About what? About the restructuring. A pause. Someone told them there's a restructuring happening, that leadership is shifting, They want to know what it means for their arrangement. Someone had told them. Cassandra had been on the phone to Harmon before she was out of the elevator. Harmon had partners. Partners talked. When did they reach out? Raphael said. 40 minutes ago. While you were inside. 40 minutes ago. He had been sitting across from his mother negotiating her withdrawal from operations while simultaneously, in some other part of the network, the information about the instability was already moving. Moving the way these things moved, not in clean lines, but in the specific dispersed pattern of rumor inside a closed system, touching everything simultaneously, impossible to trace back to a single point. Set the meeting, Raphael said. Tonight? Tonight. My office. He paused. And get me everything on Dragutin's current position. What he holds, what he wants, what he's been building toward. Victor acknowledged and ended the call. Raphael sat back in the seat. The drives were in his coat pocket, both of them, the weight of them present against his ribs. Outside, the city moved past with its complete indifference. The same choreography of traffic and pedestrians and commerce that had been happening while everything inside his world was reorganizing itself. He thought about Elena at the kitchen table with her coffee, Noah in the high chair, the morning light coming through the window of the coastal house. He thought about the hand on his head, Noah's grip on the tray, the stillness, the eyes looking up. He thought about Dragutin. Dragutin Maric was 54 and had been operating in the Western Corridor for 11 years, with the specific dangerous patience of a man who understood that organizations had cycles and that the moment of transition between cycles was the moment of maximum opportunity. He had never directly challenged the Voss organization's primacy. He had never needed to. He had simply waited, building his position, maintaining the arrangement, watching for the moment when the center became soft enough to press against. He was pressing, not because he knew exactly what was happening, but because he could feel the pressure change in the system the way experienced operators could. Not through intelligence, but through the animal awareness of something shifting in the structure around them. If Raphael went to that meeting with the Dragutin situation unresolved, and the Western ports in transition, and Cassandra's withdrawal, creating visible gaps in the operational continuity, Dragutin would see it all. Every detail of the last week would be legible in the specific way that weakness was legible to people who had spent their careers looking for it. He could not go into that meeting soft. He could not go in with the drives in his pocket and the coastal house in his chest and the particular vulnerability of a man who had decided to protect something at the cost of everything else. He was going to have to be, for the next several hours, entirely the thing he had decided to become less of. He was going to have to be what the city knew him as, what 15 years had built him into, what the name meant in every operational room in this network, and he was going to have to do it clearly enough that Dragutin looked across the table and saw no gap, no transition, nothing soft. He was going to have to do it while carrying the weight of a child's hand on the top of his head and an agreement with a woman in a coastal house that tonight he would come back. He pressed his thumb against the scar on his index finger until the bone ached. "Change of route," he said to the driver. Back to the office. The meeting with Dragutin happened at 8 in the evening. Dragutin came with two men who stayed outside the office door and Dragutin himself, who was built like someone who had been a physical presence earlier in his life and still carried the memory of it in his posture. He had a gray beard kept short and eyes that were the specific flat brown of someone who had learned not to let them communicate anything he hadn't decided to communicate. He sat down and looked at Raphael across the desk with the look that men in his position used when they were assessing whether what they'd heard about a situation matched what they were seeing in the room. Raphael looked back at him. "You've heard things," Raphael said. "I've heard there's a transition. There's a reorganization, not a transition. The difference being, a transition implies a change in who's running things. A reorganization implies a change in how things run." Raphael kept his voice level. "I'm reorganizing. My mother is stepping back from active operations. The accounts she managed transfer to a structure I control directly. Every arrangement that exists under the current organization continues." Dragutin listened. His eyes did not move from Raphael's face, including the Western Corridor, Including the Western Corridor, including the port arrangement. Yes. Dragutin was quiet for a moment. He put one hand flat on the surface of the desk. Not aggressive, not a power move, just a presence. The gesture of a man who was making sure the table was solid before putting weight on it. The Harmon situation. Resolved. I heard there was a delay request. The request was withdrawn. The timeline is original. Another pause. Dragutin's flat eyes moving over Raphael's face with the systematic attention of someone doing an assessment. You look tired, he said. I've had a long week. The reorganization. Yes. Dragutin was quiet again. The room was very quiet. No city sound penetrated this high, this late. Just the two of them and the desk between them and whatever Dragutin was calculating. What I need to know, Dragutin said, is whether what I have with this organization is what I have with you, directly. Not through an intermediary, not through a mother or a lieutenant or a financial channel, whether the arrangement is yours. It's mine, Raphael said. Your word. My word. Dragutin looked at him for a long moment. Then he sat back. The hand came off the desk. He nodded once, the specific single nod that carried a decision in it, the small gesture that settled something. Then we don't have a problem, he said. He stood. Dragutin, Raphael said. The man paused. I'm going to need 6 weeks for the restructuring to settle. Payments continue on the existing schedule, no disruption. But for 6 weeks, I need the corridor stable. No opportunism, no testing the new arrangement. Dragutin looked at him. The flat eyes. The assessment. In exchange, Raphael said, when the 6 weeks are done, the Western Corridor arrangement expands, the terms you've been asking for since last year, the Braga access. It's on the table. The Braga access. He had been holding that for a year, had known Dragutin wanted it, had used the wanting as leverage to maintain the man's patience. He was spending that leverage now, in advance, against 6 weeks of stability. It was expensive. He was paying it. Dragutin looked at him for another moment. Then something in his face moved. Not much, but something. The specific movement of a man who has just been given something he wanted and is recalibrating the value of the relationship accordingly. 6 weeks, he said. 6 weeks. Dragutin nodded, turned, went to the door. When it closed, Raphael sat very still for a moment. Victor came in from the side. He had been listening. Of course he had been listening. Braga, he said. I know. That took 3 years to position. I know. You just spent it on a holding pattern. I spent it on 6 weeks. Raphael looked at his phone. No messages from Elena. The two men outside the coastal house, he had checked with them at 6 and again at 7, both times quiet. Nothing. 6 weeks is enough time to finish this. Finish what exactly? All of it. He stood, picked up his coat. I need a car south, now. It's 9 o'clock. I told her I'd be back tonight. Victor looked at him for a moment with the expression he used when he was deciding whether to argue with something. He decided not to. Car's downstairs, he said. Raphael moved to the door. At the door he stopped. Victor? He turned. The drives, both of them. I need you to handle the destruction, tonight, while I'm gone, properly. Victor nodded slowly. And the Solis material. That too, all of it, clean. Victor was quiet for a moment. You're sure? I'm sure. He paused. It was never supposed to be a weapon. It was built as one, and I used it as one, and that's done now. I don't want it in the world. Victor looked at him. Then, all right. Raphael went through the door and into the elevator and down to the car and out into the night air that smelled like the city, exhaust and concrete and the particular cold of early evening, and he got in the back seat and said south, and the car moved. The highway opened up ahead of them. The city fell away behind. He sat in the dark and felt the specific exhaustion of a man who had been in 3 different kinds of battle in one day and had won each of them at a cost he was still calculating. He thought about what waited at the other end of the drive, the coastal house, the garden with the weathered fence, the kitchen with the coffee mug and the container plants, and the high chair, and the specific ordinary weight of a life that had been built in hiding and was now going to have to be built in the open. His phone lit up. Elena. A text. Still awake. Noah's down. Come around the back when you get here. He looked at it. He typed back hour and a half. He put the phone in his pocket and looked at the road ahead. The headlights cutting into the dark. The highway empty at this hour. The distance between where he was and where he was going. An hour and a half. He had Dragutin stable for 6 weeks. He had Cassandra's withdrawal agreed. He had both drives en route to destruction. He had 2 men outside a house near the water keeping watch over the people who mattered. He had not yet told Elena about the file with his name. He had not yet told her what was potentially still out there in the organizational record, what cleaning up the archive wouldn't fully solve, what 14 years of attributed decisions meant for the long-term exposure, what it might eventually cost. She needed to know. He was going to tell her tonight, and then she was going to look at him across the kitchen table with the coffee mug and the exhaustion and the particular guarded assessment of a woman who had already paid enormous costs for trusting the wrong version of a situation, and she was going to decide what she did with the information. He had no control over what she decided. That was the thing he was still learning how to live inside of. The specific terrible freedom of having made the right choice and having no guarantee of what it returned. The highway continued. The dark continued. An hour and a half. He pressed his thumb against the scar until the bone ached, and then he stopped pressing, and he put his hands flat on his thighs, and he rode toward the coast in the dark, with everything that was true about his life sitting in him like something he was finally willing to carry without putting it down. He came around the back of the house the way she'd asked. The garden gate was unlocked. He pushed it open carefully, the way you moved through spaces where people were sleeping, and he went through and latched it behind him and stood for a moment in the dark of the garden. The ocean sound was louder here than in the front. The back of the house faced the direction of the water, even though the water itself was 2 blocks away, and the sound came through with the low, continuous presence of something that had been happening long before any of this and would continue long after. The back door light was on. A single bulb above the door, yellow and warm, casting a small circle of visibility in the dark garden. Elena was sitting on the back step with a mug in both hands and her knees pulled up slightly, the posture of someone who had been sitting there long enough to settle into it. She looked up when she heard the gate and watched him cross the garden without saying anything. He sat down beside her on the step. Not close, a foot of space between them, the specific distance of 2 people who had history, but not yet the present tense ease that came after history, was resolved. She handed him the mug without being asked. He took it. Coffee, still warm. He drank from it and looked at the garden in the dark. The container plants along the fence edge, the grass, the weathered gray of the fence itself, and didn't say anything for a moment. "How did it go?" she said. "Dragutin is stable. 6 weeks. And Cassandra." She agreed. Elena was quiet. He could feel her processing it. Not celebratory, not relieved, just taking the information in and building a structure around it the way she built everything. "You believe her?" "I believe she made a calculation, the same way she always makes calculations. She decided what I was offering was better than the alternative. And the alternative was the Solis documentation." "Yes. Which you're destroying. Victor's handling it tonight." She looked at him. Not sharp. Something more careful than sharp. "Why?" "Because it was a weapon. I used it as one. That's done." "Raphael, that's the only thing that keeps her—" "No." He turned to look at her. "What keeps her is that she made a calculation and she's committed to it. The documentation was the leverage that produced the commitment. It served its purpose." He paused. "I'm not going to spend the rest of my life holding a dead woman's file over my mother's head. I'm not willing to be that." Elena looked at him for a long moment. The light from the back door caught the side of her face, the tiredness around her eyes, the set of her jaw, the particular expression of someone who was deciding whether to trust the reasoning or push against it. She didn't push against it. "There's something else," he said. She waited. He told her about the file with his name. All of it. The 14 years, the attributed decisions, the liability structure. what it meant for the organizational record, and what it meant for his exposure once the archive was destroyed. He told her quietly and without inflection, the way you deliver difficult information when you had decided that the person receiving it deserved the unmediated version. She listened. She didn't interrupt. She kept her hands around a mug that was probably empty by now, and she listened to the whole shape of it. When he finished, the garden was quiet except for the ocean. "So there are records," she said, "in the organization's history, with your name on them." "Yes." "And destroying the archive doesn't erase the organizational records?" "No. The archive was Cassandra's private documentation. What's in the broader organizational record is a separate matter." "What does that mean?" "Long term. It means I'm exposed, at some level, for some of what was done in the early years under my name, before I had the experience to know what I was authorizing." He paused. "It means that's a risk I'm going to carry. For a long time, probably." She absorbed this. He watched her do it. The way she sat with difficult information, not flinching away from it, but not rushing to a response either. Just letting it be true and looking at what was true. "You gave up the thing that protected you," she said, "the Solis material. You gave that up and you're left with the exposure and no leverage against it." "Yes." "Why?" He looked at his hands, the knuckles, the scar. "Because the alternative was being the person who held it, and I don't want to be that person anymore." He paused. "I don't want Noah to grow up knowing that's what his father carried." The word Noah in that sentence did something to the air between them. She felt it. He could see her feel it, the small adjustment, the way a single word could change the acoustic quality of everything around it. She looked at the garden for a moment. "You could still be prosecuted if the records surface." "Yes." "That's a real possibility." "Yes." "And you're telling me this because you need to know what you're walking into. If you decide to—" He stopped, started again with more precision. "If we decide to try to build something, for him, you need to know what the risk profile looks like." She said nothing for a while. The mug sat in her hands, empty now, just something to hold. "You came 4 hours south," she said finally, "at 9 o'clock at night, to tell me about a liability that might not ever materialize, so that I could make an informed decision." "Yes." "Most men would have held that back." "I know." She looked at him. "You're different than you were." "I don't know that I am," he said honestly. "I think I'm the same. I just finally understand what I'm for." Something shifted in her face. Not quite a smile. Too much history between them for anything that uncomplicated, but the motion in the direction of one. The specific motion of a face that has been held very controlled for a very long time, finding a small release. "Come inside," she said. "I'll make more coffee." "Miss Sun." They sat at the kitchen table until 2 in the morning, not talking about the organization, or Cassandra, or Dragutin, or the files, or any of the structure of the last week. Talking about the 3 years, the real shape of them, the granular day-to-day of what it had been like for her to build a life in hiding with a child she was raising alone. She talked in the flat, specific way she talked when she was telling the truth rather than managing an impression. And he listened with the focused attention he normally reserved for things that were going to cost him something, because this was going to cost him something, and he knew it, and he didn't look away from any of it. She told him about the apartment she'd rented in the first city. Too expensive, too visible, not sustainable. The job she'd found in the second city, administrative work for a shipping logistics company, which had the useful quality of involving people who didn't ask questions about each other's histories because everyone in that industry had a history they didn't discuss. She told him about finding the coastal town, not deliberately, but the way you found things when you were tired and the right thing appeared, and renting the house and becoming clairvoyant with the thoroughness of someone who understood that half measures in that kind of work got people found. She told him about the night Noah was born. Alone, in a hospital 2 towns over, under the name she'd made for herself. A nurse named Patricia, who had stayed with her through it because Elena had been alone, and Patricia had understood what alone meant in that room at that moment. He sat across from her and listened to this, and did not let himself look away from what it cost him to hear it. "I named him Noah," she said, because it means rest. Which sounds... She paused. I know how it sounds, but I had been running for 7 months by then, and he felt like the first thing that wasn't about running. He felt like the thing I was running toward, so I named him for that. Raphael looked at the table. I should have found a way, he said. To what? To make it so you didn't have to run, to make it so you knew that... He stopped. The sentence didn't have a clean ending. I should have made it so that coming to me was safer than leaving. She looked at him. Maybe, she said, but that's not who you were then. No. And I wasn't who I am now. I believed what she told me. Not because I was naive, because the evidence supported it. She paused. You had built a world where the evidence supported it. He didn't argue with that. I know. I'm not saying it to... She stopped. I'm not assigning blame anymore. I spent 3 years with the blame, and it didn't build anything. I'm saying it because I need you to understand what it actually took. Not as an accusation, as information. I understand. Do you? She looked at him. Because understanding it changes what comes next. It changes what this... She gestured between them, the small motion that encompassed the kitchen, the house, the child sleeping in the back room. It changes what this is allowed to be. It can't just go back to what it was. I know. I'm not asking for that. What are you asking for? He thought about it, not performing the thinking, actually doing it, sitting with the question, which deserved the courtesy of a real answer rather than the first available one. Time, he said finally. And proximity. I want to be here. Not... I know that's complicated. I'm not asking you to reorganize your life overnight. I'm asking to be close enough that he knows who I am, that I'm not a stranger, and then... He paused. Whatever comes after that, we figure out together. She held his gaze. No more surveillance without telling me, she said. No. No more decisions that involve this house or this child that go through your organization first. No. If something is coming, if there's a threat, if the exposure you're carrying creates a situation, you tell me immediately, directly. I am not managed. Understood. She held his gaze for another moment. Assessing. The specific look of someone who had been assessing him for a long time and was now doing it with more information than she'd previously had. Okay, she said. Just that. Okay. Not effusive, not qualified, not wrapped in conditions beyond the ones she'd already stated. Just the word, placed between them, which, in the context of everything it followed, was not a small thing. He let out a breath. Outside, the ocean made its sound. The back door light was still on. Somewhere in the house, in the back room, Noah was sleeping through all of it with the specific grace of someone who hadn't yet learned that the world had weight. In the morning, Raphael was still there. He had slept on the couch. Elena had offered it without ceremony, putting a blanket over the arm and leaving a pillow, and he had fallen asleep in his clothes without meaning to, which told him something about what the last week had done to him physiologically. He woke at 7 to the sound of Noah making the sounds that preceded full waking, the little vocalizations of a creature calibrating the difference between sleep and the world. And he lay still on the couch and listened to Elena's footsteps moving toward the back room, and then her voice, low and warm in the particular register she used with the child, and then Noah's responding sounds, higher and more various. He sat up. He was in his clothes from the day before, and his mouth tasted like old coffee and the particular staleness of a night spent horizontal in the wrong location. He ran his hand over his face and looked at the kitchen through the doorway. The morning light coming through the window, cleaner and warmer than the previous day's pale flat light, the actual light of a day that intended to be itself. Elena came through with Noah on her hip. She saw him sitting up and said nothing for a moment, just took him in, the fact of him on her couch in the morning, which was either ordinary or extraordinary depending on what you decided it was. Coffee, she said. Please. She set Noah down on the kitchen floor with a toy he immediately engaged with and started the coffee. and Raphael came to stand in the kitchen doorway and watched Noah operate the toy. A stacking ring set, which Noah was currently not stacking, but was examining individually with the focused thoroughness of a quality inspector, and felt the specific weight of standing in a kitchen at 7 in the morning watching something that was his. He does that with everything new, Elena said, not looking up from the coffee. Takes it apart before he figures out what it's for. Reasonable approach, Raphael said. She looked up at him. Something in her face that was the morning version of what had been there last night at the back door. The careful movement in a direction. Noah looked up from the rings. He looked at Raphael with the same direct inventory as before, the same unguarded assessment. Then he picked up one of the rings and held it out toward Raphael. Raphael crossed the kitchen and crouched down to the child's level. He took the ring from Noah's hand. It was a red ring, the largest of the set, smooth plastic. He held it and looked at his son. Noah looked at the ring in Raphael's hand. Then he reached out and took it back. Then he held it out again. This was apparently the activity, the giving and taking of the red ring. Raphael accepted it each time and returned it each time, and Noah ran this protocol with the serious concentration of a child conducting an important experiment. Elena set 2 mugs on the counter and leaned against the kitchen wall and watched them. Raphael didn't look up at her. He was looking at his son, who had now moved on from the ring exchange to attempting to fit the red ring over Raphael's index finger, which was not working due to the relative dimensions involved, but was apparently worth sustained effort. He's going to be stubborn about that, Elena said. He's going to figure it out, Raphael said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, yeah, she said, probably. He drove back to the city at noon, not because there was a specific emergency. The morning had been quiet. Victor's check-in at 9 had been routine. Dragutin's 6-week hold was in effect. But because there was work, and the work didn't stop, and the shape of what he was building toward required him to be present in it, rather than pretending the city didn't exist. He called Victor from the car. The drives, he said. Done. Last night, 2 hours after you left. I did it personally. All of it. Everything on both drives. The Solis material, the name file, the associated documentation, clean. He looked at the highway ahead. And the broader organizational record. That's going to take time. There are 7 years of embedded documentation, account records, authorization chains, correspondence logs. I can start building a remediation strategy, but start, Raphael said. Quietly. I want to understand the full scope of what's attributed before we figure out how to address it. It's going to be expensive. Legally. I know. Get me someone good, outside the current structure, someone who doesn't have existing relationships with the organization. Independent counsel. Yes. Victor was quiet for a moment. You're going to go through it all. Officially. Yes. That could... He stopped. Started again. There could be things in there that... Victor. Raphael kept his voice level. I'm going to go through it. Whatever's in there, I'm going to deal with it. I'm done managing things from the edges. A pause. Okay, Victor said, and I need you to set up a call with my mother. This week. Not adversarial. I want to talk to her about the transition structure. How the accounts transfer. Who takes the operational channels she's been running. What the clean version of this looks like organizationally. He paused. She agreed to withdraw. I'm going to make it possible for her to do that without it looking like a collapse. You're protecting her exit. I'm protecting the organization's stability. Her exit happens to benefit from that. He paused. And she's Noah's grandmother. Victor said nothing for a moment. Understood, he said. One more thing. Raphael looked at the road. The 2 men at the coastal house. Rotate them. Different pair every 3 days, and they stay until I'm confident the situation is resolved. But Elena knows they're there. She knows who they are, and she has a direct contact number for whoever's on rotation. Not through you. Not through me. She doesn't come to me to reach them. She reaches them directly. You're integrating her into the security structure. I'm making sure she has access to her own protection. Those are not the same thing. A pause. That's a meaningful distinction, Victor said. Yes, Raphael said. It is. He ended the call. The city appeared on the horizon the way it always did from this highway. The skyline building gradually, the accumulated vertical weight of it, the thing he had been returning to for 15 years. He looked at it, and it was the same as it had always been, and meant something it hadn't meant before. It was where the work was. It was not where he was going. To South. 3 weeks after that morning in the kitchen, Elena packed 2 bags and drove north. Not to leave, to arrive. Raphael had found the apartment through a property contact who had no organizational relationship. A clean transaction, legitimate, in a building in the north of the city that had nothing to do with anything in his professional geography. 2 floors below the top, facing west, with a room that had enough space for a crib and a small person who was growing into the serious business of walking and who required, Elena had informed him with flat practicality, more floor space than the coastal house had been providing. He met her in the parking garage when she pulled in. She got out of the car and he moved to the passenger side to unlatch Noah from the car seat, which he had learned how to do over the 3 visits he'd made to the coast in the intervening weeks. The specific release mechanism, the angle of the harness adjustment, the way Noah needed a moment after being unlatched to reorient himself to vertical. He lifted his son out of the seat. Noah grabbed his collar. He carried him up in the elevator, and Elena walked beside him with a bag over each shoulder, and they were quiet in the way of people who didn't need to fill the space, which was a different kind of quiet than any of the previous ones. The apartment was furnished minimally, enough to be livable, not enough to be presumptuous. Elena had been specific about wanting to establish things herself, which he had understood and accepted. The crib was already assembled in the back room. He had assembled it the previous weekend while she remained at the coast packing, which had taken him 40 minutes and a second reading of the instructions, and had produced in him a particular satisfaction that he had no existing framework to categorize. She walked through the apartment, opening doors, looking at rooms. He stood in the main space with Noah on his hip, who was looking at the ceiling with the inventory expression. She came back into the main room. "It's good," she said. "Okay." "The light in the back room is good for him. He sleeps better with morning light." "I didn't know that." "You do now." He looked at her. She looked at him. Noah was still looking at the ceiling, following something in the quality of the light that only he could see. "I'm going to need help," she said, "understanding what's changing, with the organization, with the legal situation. I don't need to be inside it, but I need to understand it. I'll tell you everything. I mean it. Not the managed version, the actual version." "I know, I mean it too." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she reached up and took the bag off her left shoulder and set it on the kitchen counter, and she began unzipping it with the purposeful efficiency of someone starting a task that needed doing, and the motion of it, the ordinary, practical, fully present motion of a person beginning to settle into a space, moved through Raphael with the quality of something being set down after a long carry. He turned to the window. The city was out there. The west-facing view, the afternoon light coming in at the angle that would, as the year changed, become the particular gold of early evenings. He stood at the window with his son on his hip and looked at the city and breathed. Noah put one hand flat against the glass, cold on one side, warm on the other. The child pressed his palm against the pane and looked at the city with the same focused inventory he brought to everything. The rings, the ceiling, the new man who kept appearing in his days and who smelled like something he was still cataloging. Raphael put his hand next to Noah's on the glass, larger, scarred at the knuckle, carrying its history in the lines of it. Noah looked at the 2 hands side by side. Then he looked up at Raphael with the dark eyes that were exact and immediate and completely without any of the complication that had produced them. And he made a sound that was somewhere between a word and not a word yet. The specific sound of a person at the edge of language, just arriving at it, bringing everything with them and nothing against them. Raphael looked at his son. Something in his chest that had been pressing outward for weeks, for months, for longer than that. The thing with no name that had been building since an airport terminal, and a pair of eyes in a crowd, and the specific impossible moment of recognition. That thing found its edge and dissolved. Not dramatically, not loudly, just dissolved. The way a pressure equalizes when something opens. He took his hand off the glass. He shifted Noah to his other arm and turned back to the kitchen where Elena was unpacking with her sleeves pushed up and her hair falling forward the way it did when she was focused. And he crossed the room and set Noah down on the kitchen floor where there was space, and he stood beside her and started helping. She didn't say anything. She passed him a stack of things that needed to go in the upper cabinet, and he put them there because he was taller and the upper cabinet was where they went. And they moved through the bag with the quiet efficiency of two people who were learning, in real time, what ordinary looked like between them. Outside, the city did what cities did. Inside, a child sat on a kitchen floor and found something in the corner that warranted his full attention. And two people unpacked a bag beside him, and the afternoon light moved across the floor in the slow way of things that were not in a hurry. A year passed, not cleanly, not without cost. The legal remediation of the organizational record took 11 months and 2 independent attorneys, and produced 3 separate written disclosures to regulatory bodies that Raphael signed himself, in his own name, with full knowledge of what signing them meant. Some of what the disclosures contained had consequences. He paid them. Not all of them were financial. Cassandra withdrew from operations in the formal sense, but not from existing. She lived in her building and took calls and had lunch with people and was present in the city in the way of someone who had been a force in it for a long time and remained one by virtue of history even after stepping back from practice. She did not contact Elena. She did not come to the apartment uninvited. She came once, invited. Raphael had called her and asked her to come on a Sunday afternoon, and she had arrived in the charcoal suit with the precision hair and the constructed management of 61 years. And she had sat in the apartment's main room, and Noah had looked at her from across the kitchen floor with the inventory expression, and she had looked back at him, and something in her face had done something that Raphael watched and did not comment on. Noah crawled to her. Not because he had been encouraged. Elena was in the kitchen, and Raphael was beside her, and neither of them said anything. Noah simply made the determination that this new person warranted investigation and moved toward her with the committed efficiency of someone with a clear destination. And he reached the chair where she was sitting and pulled himself up on her legs and looked at her from close range. Cassandra looked at him for a moment, then she reached down and lifted him. With the specific practice movement of a woman who had once lifted a child this size and had not forgotten how, and settled him in her lap. Noah immediately grabbed her bracelet. She let him. Raphael stood in the kitchen doorway and watched his mother hold his son, and he held the full complexity of everything that was true. What she had done, what it had cost, what she had said on her way out of his office that morning, that had turned out to be half true in the way that complicated things were half true, that love made him a different kind of target, that had turned out to mean something different than the warning she'd intended. And he held all of it and did not try to resolve it into something simpler than it was. Some things didn't resolve. Some things you carried at their actual weight for as long as you carried them, and the carrying was the only resolution available. Victor remained. He restructured into a legitimate operational role that the legal remediation required and adapted to it with the efficiency of a man who had been solving problems in difficult environments for 15 years and understood that the environment had changed, but the skill set had not. He came to the apartment sometimes on Sunday evenings and ate Elena's cooking with the specific gratitude of a man who lived alone. And he played a game with Noah that involved Noah hiding an object and Victor pretending not to know where it was until the suspense became unbearable and the reveal happened with maximum theatrical satisfaction. Noah, at 14 months, had become a walking person. Unsteady, committed, prone to changing direction mid-stride for reasons legible only to himself. At 18 months, he had opinions about everything and the vocal force to express them. At 22 months, he said a word that Raphael heard while helping him with the stacking rings. Not the red ring this time, but the blue one, second largest, which was apparently of inferior quality to the red one, and this required commentary. The word was his name. Not a word he'd been taught, not something prompted. Just the word, produced in the specific, imprecise way of a person still working out the full phonology of the world, emerging from Noah's mouth while he examined the blue ring with the quality inspector focus. Raphael held very still. Noah looked up at him. Said it again. 2 syllables. Softened, imprecise at the edges, but unmistakably that. Unmistakably him, coming from his son's mouth with the casualness of something that had already been decided and simply needed to be said. He sat on the kitchen floor with his son for a long time after that. Elena found them there. She stood in the kitchen doorway the way he'd stood in that doorway many times now, and she looked at the two of them, the man and the child on the floor with the stacking rings between them. And she leaned against the door frame, and she didn't say anything, and she didn't need to. Outside, the city went on. The city always went on. Inside the apartment that had become, through the accumulation of ordinary days, a home. Inside the space where two people were still figuring out what they were building and a child was becoming whatever he was going to be, the afternoon light moved across the floor in its slow way, unhurried, going nowhere in particular, simply present the way light was present, the way the people in its path had finally learned to be. Raphael looked at his son. His son looked at the blue ring, and then at him, and then back at the ring, with the complete present tense attention of someone who had not yet learned to be anywhere other than exactly where he was. That was the lesson. Raphael was still learning it, but he was here now, and the here was real. And for the first time in 35 years of building things that were supposed to protect him from exactly this, the exposure, the vulnerability, the specific danger of having something that could be taken, he understood that the danger was not the problem. The danger was the proof that something was finally worth protecting.